If you want to know how quickly your body is aging from the inside, don't look at your blood work. Don't look at your waistline. Look at the lining of your intestines. Because right now, invisible particles smaller than a grain of sand are shredding your gut wall like sandpaper on wet tissue paper. A recent study found that the average person swallows roughly 5 grams of microplastic every single week. That's the equivalent of eating a credit card. And here's what no one is telling you. Once these particles embed in your gut lining, they trigger a cascade of inflammation that has been linked to everything from autoimmune flare-ups to unexplained weight gain. But here's the good news. Specific foods, ones you can buy at any grocery store, can bind to these particles and physically escort them out of your body. Most people believe microplastics are an environmental problem, something that affects the ocean, sea turtles, maybe your tap water. But after nearly 15 years in emergency medicine and preventive care, I've watched a completely different pattern emerge. Microplastics are not just floating in the ocean. They are lodged in your intestinal tissue right now, weakening the barrier that separates your bloodstream from everything you swallow. And the damage they cause looks almost identical to early-stage inflammatory bowel disease. Except most doctors aren't even testing for it. Hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Beltrán. I'm an emergency medicine physician. And after years of treating patients with mysterious digestive complaints, chronic bloating, sudden food intolerances, fatigue that no blood test could explain, I started noticing something unsettling. These patients didn't have infections. They didn't have classic IBS. What they had was a gut lining that looked inflamed and eroded. And the emerging research pointed towards something we've all been ignoring. The microplastics accumulating in our food, our water, and even the air we breathe. We've been told that our bodies just pass these particles through. But the science tells a very different story. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how microplastics physically damage your gut lining and disrupt your microbiome at a cellular level. The 3 biological mechanisms that make this damage so dangerous. 7 specific foods, all available at a regular grocery store, that can bind to microplastic particles and help your body eliminate them. The exact amounts, timing, and preparation methods that the research says matter most. The common mistakes that make microplastic exposure worse, including one healthy habit that actually triples your intake. A simple daily protocol you can start this week to begin repairing the damage. I need one quick favor from your side. A lot of you tell me you've been watching for weeks before realizing you weren't subscribed yet. If that's you right now, tap the button. It's the single best way to tell YouTube to keep showing you this kind of content. To understand why microplastics are so destructive to your gut, you first need to understand what your gut lining actually is. Think of the inside of your intestines like a drawbridge over a castle moat. When the drawbridge is up, when the gut lining is intact, only the things you want get into the castle. Nutrients, water, essential minerals, everything else, toxins, bacteria, waste stays out in the moat and gets flushed away. But microplastics are like tiny invaders who jam the drawbridge mechanism. They wedge themselves between the cells of your intestinal wall, cells that are connected by structures called tight junctions, and they physically pry those connections apart. Once those junctions loosen, the drawbridge is stuck halfway open. Now everything in the moat starts flooding into the castle. Undigested food particles, bacterial fragments called lipopolysaccharides. This is what researchers call intestinal permeability. And you might know it by its more common name, leaky gut. But that's only the first layer of damage. The second thing microplastics do is act like a wrecking ball to your microbiome. Your gut houses roughly 38 trillion bacteria. More bacteria than human cells in your entire body. These microbes aren't freeloaders. They manufacture vitamins. They regulate your immune response. They even produce neurotransmitters that affect your mood. When microplastic particles settle into your intestinal lining, they create what scientists describe as a plastosphere, a biofilm surface that favors the growth of harmful bacteria and actively suppresses beneficial species. It's like dumping gravel onto a carefully planted garden. The weeds thrive, the crops die. And here's the part that makes this especially dangerous. Roughly 70 to 80% of your entire immune system is housed in and around your gut wall. So when microplastics compromise that barrier and disrupts that bacterial balance, your immune system doesn't just sit quietly, it goes into overdrive. Chronic low-grade inflammation that spreads systemically to your joints, your skin, your brain, your cardiovascular system. Now, here's where it gets fascinating and empowering. Your body has built-in mechanisms for binding to foreign particles, neutralizing inflammation, and repairing that intestinal lining. The problem is, most people are eating a modern diet that does nothing to activate those systems. The foods I'm about to show you are the ones the research says can. Let me walk you through the 3 specific biological mechanisms that make these foods work. First mechanism is particle absorption, and certain plant compounds have a molecular structure that physically binds to microplastic particles and the heavy metals they carry. Think of it like a magnet grabbing iron filings off a table. These compounds, particularly a class of fibers called modified pectins and a group of polysaccharides found in certain seaweeds, wrap around the plastic particles, prevent them from embedding deeper into tissue, and carry them out through your stool. This isn't theoretical. It has been measured in controlled human studies using stool sample analysis and electron microscopy. Second mechanism is tight junction repair. Once microplastics loosen those connections between your gut cells, you need specific nutrients that signal those cells to rebuild. A protein called zullin is one of the primary regulators of tight junction permeability. Certain amino acids, particularly glutamine and specific polyphenol found in berries and root vegetables, have been shown in clinical studies to downregulate cellulin production and physically tighten those cell-to-well connections. Imagine it as resealing the grout between tiles in a shower wall. The tiles are still there. They just need the sealant between them restored. Third mechanism is microbiome restoration and immune recalibration. This is where many people stop too early. Even if you remove the plastic particles and repair the lining, if your bacterial populations remain disrupted, the inflammation cycle continues. Specific prebiotic compounds, not probiotics, prebiotics, selectively feed the beneficial bacterial species that microplastics have suppressed. When these populations rebound, they produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which is the single most important fuel source for your colon cells and one of the strongest natural anti-inflammatory compounds your body can produce. This is measured through fecal short-chain fatty acid assays, and the improvements are visible within weeks. A 2023 study from the University of Vienna analyzed intestinal tissue biopsies from 52 adults and found microplastic particles embedded in the gut mucosa of every single participant 100%. The most common polymers were polyethylene and polypropylene, and tissue surrounding the particles showed significantly elevated inflammatory markers, specifically interleukin-6 and TNF-alpha compared to adjacent clean tissue. Researchers at McMaster University in Canada conducted a 10-week randomized controlled trial with 78 participants. The group consuming 15 grams of modified citrus pectin daily showed a 43% increase in urinary excretion of lead and a measurable reduction in circulating microplastic-associated toxins as measured through mass spectrometry stool analysis. A study from the Tokyo University of Marine Science examined the binding capacity of alginate, a compound extracted from brown seaweed, and found it could absorb up to 80% of polyethylene microparticles in a simulated gut environment within 4 hours. This was confirmed using scanning electron microscopy at Penn State. A 12-week supplementation trial with glutamine at 5 grams daily showed a 28% reduction in intestinal permeability as measured by the lactulose mannitol test, the gold standard for tight junction integrity in patients with documented leaky gut. And perhaps most impressively, researchers at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands followed 340 adults for 6 months and found that those consuming a high prebiotic fiber diet, at least 30 grams of diverse plant fiber daily, had fecal butyrate levels 2.4 times higher than control groups, and their inflammatory markers dropped to levels typically seen in individuals a decade younger. These aren't anecdotes. These are quantifiable, measurable biological changes documented in peer-reviewed research. Here is the exact protocol. Every food includes the dose, timing, and preparation method that the research supports. First and most important one is chlorella 3G, about 1 teaspoon of powder taken with breakfast. Chlorella is a single-celled freshwater algae with a unique triple-layered cell wall that acts as a natural absorbent. It binds to heavy metals and microplastic-associated toxins in your digestive tract before they can be absorbed. Clinical research shows it enhances fecal excretion of dioxins and polychlorinated biphenyls by up to 37%. Stir the powder into a morning smoothie or mix with water, but never heat it. High temperatures degrade its binding capacity. Second food on today's list is wakame seaweed. 5 grams dried, roughly 2 tablespoons rehydrated. Waka contains a polysaccharide called phycoidin and is rich in alginate, the same compound the Tokyo study showed could absorb 80% of microplastic particles. Add rehydrated waka to soups, salads, or grain bowls. If seaweed is new to you, start with 2g and build up over 2 weeks to avoid digestive discomfort. Third food is cooked green plantains. Half a medium plantain 4 to 5 times per week, steamed or boiled, then cooled. Green plantains are one of the richest whole food sources of resistant starch, a prebiotic fiber that your beneficial gut bacteria ferment directly into butyrate. Here's the key. Cooking and then cooling the plantain increases the resistant starch content by up to 50% through a process called retrobradation. Slice them, steam for 12 minutes, let them cool to room temperature, then eat. This is the preparation method that maximizes butyrate production. Fourth and most effective food is flax seeds. 2 tablespoons freshly ground daily added to any meal. Flax seeds create a viscous mucilage when they contact liquid in your gut. This gel-like coating physically lines the intestinal wall, creating a temporary barrier that reduces microplastic contact with your tissue while your tight junctions repair. Flax also delivers lignans, a polyphenol shown to reduce intestinal psoin levels by up to 22% in clinical trials. Critical rule: you must grind them fresh. Whole flax seeds pass through undigested and pre-grown flax oxidizes rapidly. Buy whole seeds and grind them in a coffee grinder just before eating. Here comes fifth food. Bone broth or glutamine-rich foods. 1 cup of slow-simmered bone broth daily or 5g of glutamine powder. Glutamine is the primary fuel for enterics, the cells that make up your intestinal lining. When your gut is under microlastic assault, glutamine demand skyrockets and most people are chronically deficient. The Penn State study showed measurable tight junction repair in 12 weeks at 5 grams daily. If you prefer whole food, homemade bone broth simmered for at least 12 hours is the most concentrated dietary source. For vegetarians, red cabbage juice, about half a cup daily, provides glutamine along with anthocyanins that have independent gut healing properties. Sixth one is tart cherries. 1 cup of frozen tart cherries or 30 milliliters, 1 ounce of unsweetened tart cherry concentrate daily. Tart cherries deliver a specific profile of anthocyanins and proanthocyanidins that have been shown to reduce intestinal inflammation markers by up to 40% in controlled trials. Unlike sweet cherries, the tart variety contains significantly higher concentrations of cyanide, a compound that directly inhibits the NF-κB inflammatory pathway activated by microplastic exposure. Frozen works equally well as fresh. Add them to a morning smoothie or dilute the concentrate in water as an evening drink. Very last and important food is raw garlic. 2 medium cloves daily, crushed and rested for 10 minutes before eating. Garlic contains alizanin, a sulfur compound that selectively inhibits the pathogenic bacteria that thrive on the microplastic plastosphere while leaving beneficial species like lactobacillus and bifidobacteria unharmed. A study from the University of Western Ontario showed that 2 cloves of raw garlic daily increased lactobacillus populations by 34% in just 3 weeks. The 10-minute rest after crushing is essential. It allows the enzyme alanine to convert alanine into active alizanin. Cooking destroys this enzyme almost entirely. If raw garlic is too intense, mince it and swallow the pieces with water like small pills. After nearly 15 years of clinical practice, here's what I tell my patients to get the most out of this protocol. First tip is time your binders before meals. Take chlorella and seaweed at least 15 minutes before your largest meal. This positions the binding agents in your gut before the food and the microplastics it inevitably carries arrives. Think of it as laying down a net before the fish swim through. Second tip is pair plantains with flax seed. The resistant starch from the cold plantain feeds your gut bacteria and the mucilage from the flax protects the lining simultaneously. Eating them together creates a synergistic effect. The bacteria are being fed while the lining is being shielded. I have patients who mash cooled plantain and stir in brown flax as a simple morning base. Third tip is rotate your prebiotic sources. Microbial diversity depends on fiber diversity. Don't eat the same prebiotic food every single day. Alternate between plantains, Jerusalem artichokes, underripe bananas, and raw jicama throughout the week. Different fibers feed different bacterial species, and diversity is the hallmark of a resilient microbiome. Tip 4 is filter your water, but don't stop there. A high-quality carbon block filter removes the majority of microplastics from tap water. But the biggest dietary source of microplastics isn't water. It's food heated in plastic containers and tea steeped in synthetic tea bags. One study found that a single plastic tea bag at brewing temperature releases over 11 billion microplastic particles into a single cup. Switch to loose leaf tea and never microwave food in plastic. Not even containers labeled microwave safe. Tip 5. Consistency is more powerful than intensity. I've had patients try to compress this entire protocol into a single massive smoothie once a day. That doesn't work. Your gut heals through steady, repeated exposure to these compounds over weeks and months. Small amounts daily outperform large doses sporadically every time. Aim for at least 5 of these 7 foods every single day. That's the threshold where the research shows measurable repair begins. Let me cover the biggest mistakes I see people make. And every single one of them has a simple fix. Mistake number 1 is relying on probiotic supplements instead of prebiotic whole foods. Most commercial probiotic capsules contain a handful of bacterial strains that don't survive stomach acid and never colonize your gut in meaningful numbers. Prebiotic fiber from whole foods, plantains, flax, garlic, jicama feeds the bacteria already adapted to your microbiome. That's far more effective than importing foreign strains from a capsule. Supplements are not a substitute for whole foods. They never have been. Mistake 2 is expecting results in 3 days. Your intestinal lining replaces itself roughly every 3 to 5 days, but a damaged microbiome takes 4 to 8 weeks to meaningfully shift. If you quit after 1 week because you don't feel different, you're abandoning the protocol right before the measurable changes begin. The University of Groningen study saw the most dramatic improvements between weeks 8 and 12. Be patient with the process. Mistake 3 is reducing plastic exposure without addressing the damage already done. Switching to glass containers and stainless steel bottles is smart. I recommend it completely. But most people stop there. They reduce new exposure and assume their body will clean up the rest. It won't. Not efficiently. The particles already embedded in your gut tissue need to be actively bound and removed. That's what the chlorella, the seaweed, and the flaxseed mucilage are for. Reducing exposure and actively flushing are 2 separate steps, and you need both. Mistake 4 is drinking plastic bottled water thinking it's cleaner. This is the one that shocks most of my patients. Bottled water has been found to contain up to 240,000 detectable plastic particles per liter, significantly more than most filtered tap water. Every time you drink from a plastic bottle, especially one that has been sitting in heat or sunlight, you are increasing your microplastic intake substantially. Glass or stainless steel always. Gut damage from microplastics is not a life sentence. It's not permanent and it is not inevitable. The patients I've seen who turn their gut health around aren't genetically special. They're not lucky. They're not wealthy enough to afford exotic treatments. They consistently, patiently, day after day, eat the foods that activate their body's built-in systems, the binding mechanisms, the tight junction repair pathways, the microbial ecosystems that evolution designed to protect them. These systems exist in you right now. They're not broken. They're starving for the right inputs and you can start feeding them today. Let me bring everything together so you walk away with total clarity. First one was about microplastics are embedded in your gut lining right now. They damage tight junctions, disrupt your microbiome and trigger chronic systemic inflammation. Second is 3 mechanisms can reverse this particle binding and removal, tight junction repair and microbiome restoration through prebiotic feeding. Third was the 7 food protocol. Chlorella 3 grams daily with breakfast never heated. Wakame seaweed 5g dried 3 to 4 times per week. Cooked and cooled green plantains half a plantain 4 to 5 times per week. Freshly ground flax seeds 2 tablespoons daily. Bone broth or glutamine 1 cup broth or 5 grams powder daily. Tart cherries 1 cup frozen or 30 milliliters concentrate daily. Raw crushed garlic 2 cloves daily, rested 10 minutes. Time your binders before meals. Pair plantains with flax. Rotate your fiber sources weekly. Eliminate plastic from food heating and tea brewing. Expect measurable gut changes in 4 to 8 weeks with daily consistency. Your health is not predetermined by your environment or your past exposure. It's influenced enormously by what you choose to put on your plate and how consistently you show up for your body. You have far more control than you've been led to believe. If you found this information valuable, I need you to do 2 things. First, share this video with someone you care about. Over 90% of adults have measurable microplastics in their digestive system, and most of them have no idea. Second, check out my video on the foods that repair your gut lining from the inside out. I break down the full science in that one. Subscribe if you haven't already. It's free and it helps me reach more people who want real science-based health information about aging well and living longer.